Welcome back to the Richard and Judy Book Club in association with WHSmith. And our next book is called Between a Mother and Her Child, and it's by Elizabeth Noble. It is a lovely book. It is also very emotional, I have to warn you, and very observant about family life, particularly family life in extremis, because what's happened in this case is that Maggie and Bill, who are very happily married, lose their teenage son in the Boxing Day tsunami, which we all remember so well. And Elizabeth's here with us now. And I do think, I mean, it becomes so apparent, doesn't it? Every time you hear a tragic news story which has involved bereavement, losing a child, men and women grieve so differently. And it very often does tear their marriage apart, and that in fact is precisely what happens to Maggie and Bill. Hi.
Hi.
Would you like to tell us a bit more about them, about Maggie and Bill?
Sure. The novel opens 2 years after this catastrophic event has imploded this family. I wanted to write once the dust had settled a little bit, because I think that's a very interesting part of the grief process, how the world carries on around you, but actually you're still very much in the maelstrom. Maggie and Bill have been married for a very long time. They've had 3 children. They met very young. She gave up a career as a very promising swimmer in Australia when she fell pregnant, and he was travelling on his gap year.
And it's a real love match, isn't it?
Yeah,
They're passionate
absolutely.
for each other,
And she's a strong, an admirable, strong woman who has been traduced completely by her grief. And yes, I was very much wanting to write about it's a strange word to use, but I think there's a really interesting hierarchy to grief, particularly within a family. There can sometimes be almost an emotional
battle,
jockeying for position. Who's hurt most? Who's grieving most? How are they grieving? Yeah. And so I wanted to take the 4 members of this family plus a few sort of satellite members of the family and look at the way grief affects something that has hitherto seemed to be really solid. Right. And I think that all marriages, actually, I've been married for 16 years with my husband for 18 years, and I would say that we have a happy marriage, but I would also probably be brave enough to say that all marriages develop little tiny hairline cracks over years, and they're caused from external and from internal forces, and then on their own they're not dangerous. But they can,
if there's a huge,
something
massive outside thing,
it can blow it up.
Yeah. What my sort of analogy when I was reading the book for all of what you just said really was that marriages are actually quite soluble, and their marriage is dissolved by grief. It's actually dissolved away.
Yes.
Even though Maggie remains in love with her husband, it's him who goes away, isn't it? It's him ultimately who leaves, and she wants him back. But it is that bond that they thought they would have forever until death is literally dissolved by this terrible tragedy. Tell us exactly what happens to Jake. He's 18, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. He's their golden boy. Yeah. He's the reason they married. He's the reason she stopped swimming. He's the reason she came to England. And he is much adored, easy, happy, successful child. And he is killed on the morning of the tsunami.
Because he has a hangover.
Because he's hungover, absolutely.
He's on the gap year.
He's on his gap year
with his 2 best friends.
Yes, they're staying on a beach, and his 2 mates, wake up and feel well enough to go in search of a fry up, and he doesn't. So you have a little sort of side story of the guilt of the best friend who was with him and feels that he should have done more to help him, even though clearly there was no helping.
No, but it's very convincing because death is so mundane, really, when it comes to it. Yeah. I mean, we had a colleague who survived the tsunami only just. She very nearly drowned, and she lost a very good friend who'd gone to the toilet. Yeah. Gone to the toilet.
It's the randomness of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And certainly Maggie, who was a swimmer, and Jake, who'd been swimming all of his life, she just can't accept. He was a better swimmer than his friends. He was stronger. And in some dark recess of her mind, he was better in every way, and he should have lived, and that the sort of injustice of it is a facet of the grief.
We've interviewed many couples after they've lost a child in notorious circumstances, which have, if you like, bestowed a kind of dark celebrity on them, and we've seen many of them break up, and we've almost been a witness of that as it's happened, as we've sort of followed their story. And what often seems to be the case, and it's certainly the case here, is that the male has to be doing something, has to be trying to make something out of the tragedy, fashion some meaning from it. I mean, the father in this case goes back to Thailand to help with the reconstruction, doesn't he?
Yes.
Leaving Maggie and the other two
Yes.
behind. And that's very sharply observed, because that is often the case, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's probably often that way round, that it's the man who wants to fix and the woman who can't.
And the woman who is left behind, still, let's remember, with two younger children, feels totally neglected, and that her husband's gone off and in a sense left her with her grief while he's doing something
absolutely
active.
But also him meeting it head on in that way. He is also the one that seeks counselling. She is very resistant to the idea of counselling. He goes to Thailand, he sees what's happened, he puts money and time and effort into it, he goes to counselling, and he hits his grief head on, and therefore he makes progress such as you can faster. And there's almost an analogy of Maggie and Bill drowning in their grief, and in the end they realise if they cling together they'll both go under. And Bill is the first one to realise that actually if they split, literally physically split apart, they both will be able to keep their heads above the
and
the
also
waves.
there is the fact, as I say, of the two younger children, and the way they have, especially Ali, who's the oldest, a teenage girl, and the way she reacts to not only losing Jake, but her parents' absolute absorption in their grief. And it's very, very difficult for her. Very.
Yes, it is. She's a teenager, so she's got that sort of slightly schizophrenic teenage thing going on anyway. She's very protective of her younger brother. She feels this very strange and sometimes slightly twisted grief about her brother, and the feeling that now she's never going to catch him up because he's been sort of frozen in time as the perfect child, and so she's got very confusing feelings, but at the same time she's squashing all of her feelings because she feels that her parents are more entitled to grief than she is, and she can't interfere in their grief with her own.
Yes, but it's interesting what you say about her brother preserved in aspect forever. I mean, it's that phrase, that you can't compete with the first dead wife. You can never compete.
No, because she never grows old. They
Absolutely.
never grow old.
Well, you speak of it as eloquently as you write. It's a fabulously written book, and a really interesting, gripping story, because one identifies so strongly with it. We could all be this family. We could all be one of them, and it has a very satisfying ending as well. It's Between a Mother and Her Child by Elizabeth Noble here. You'll love it. You really will. As always, in the back of the books, if you get them from WHSmith, there's all the extra content. There's details about how to download our podcasts, these interviews with the authors, and lots of other material with them speaking independently. There's our question and answer session in the back of the book. We put the questions to the authors that hopefully you'd like to see answered. And as of now, you can get the Book Club app. You simply download that to your smartphone, go into WHSmith, point it at the book in our selection that you might want to buy. Just point it and up will come on the little screen, talking to you and giving you a verbal review. Kind of like what we're doing here, except a bit sharper. It's very like Magic, Judy. It's very Harry Potter. Anyway, enjoy the book, and thanks for tuning in.